Here's another thing. I spoke to David Goggins about this last year, about how I was bullied as a kid and I was quite unpopular in school and I was an only child. So I didn't really have many people to back me up, in the schoolyard or whatever. And I, for a long time, had a chip on my shoulder about the kids that mistreated me in school, as you might expect. And then I got toward, maybe a few years ago, and I really, really started to reflect on it and realized that so many of the things that I valued in myself were the light side of something dark that had been created during that time in school.
This interview with Chris Williamson and Dr. Jordan Peterson teaches us the value of adversity in revealing and strengthening our own character. Seneca states, "Fire tests gold, suffering tests brave men." We should be thankful for such trials that teach us our strength. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, once said, "What is to give light must endure burning." These quotes encapsulate a fundamental Stoic belief. The challenges and attacks we face are not just obstacles, but valuable teachers. They provide us with the opportunity to grow, to build resilience, and to see the greater capacities within ourselves. Much like a castle's walls are strengthened by the assaults they endure, our character and spirit are fortified through the adversities we overcome. Thus, in a Stoic view, we should not only accept, but be thankful for the trials that life presents, as they are crucial in revealing and developing our higher selves. And back to this interview with Chris Williamson and Dr. Jordan Peterson.
So my complete preparedness to just spend time on my own means that I don't mind about moving out to a country where I don't know anybody and trying to make this podcast thing work, or spending hours and hours working or researching or recording podcasts or doing intros or whatever it is. Like all of those things. Not having a super tight social network as a kid meant that I wasn't beholden to anybody when I grew up, that I didn't feel the need to have as much support as I go along to do stuff. Now, other sides of it haven't been so great because I still seek validation. I still seek a lot of validation because that was something that I was missing as a kid. But yeah, realizing not only you probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the things that you went through. Okay, there's step one. And then step two is, and I'm quite grateful for what I've done. And then step three would be something like, wow, I'm proud of myself for having turned something that was negative into something that's positive. But then another level above that would be, wow, so maybe I should be thankful.
Yeah, right. Well, we were talking earlier in the podcast about what is the appropriate attitude towards the future. And I would say, well, we could put past, present, and future in the same bin. Say, well, one of the things that you want to do is practice gratitude. That's one of the primary religious rituals, you might say, is the practice of gratitude. And you might say, well, my life is so horrible. What do I have to be grateful for? And I would say that's for better or worse, that's still a form of blindness, right? I mean, people can have very, very difficult situations, can be in very, very difficult situations. And it's in those difficult situations where the search for gratitude becomes something that is by necessity deeper and more difficult. But that doesn't mean it's not appropriate. And there is a very tight association between loving your enemy and being grateful in spite of the terrible things that occur in your life. I've been writing about the book of Job, and Job is a story of unjust suffering, fundamentally. God deems Job a good man. So we have it on God's word that Job is actually a good man. And then all hell breaks loose, partly because God makes a bet with Satan, which is, a hell of a thing to do, and says, do your worst. He's not going to turn on me no matter what you do. And so Job, despite his torment, he becomes very ill. He loses everything he has. His friends, he becomes ill in a way that's disfiguring. His friends come around and laugh at him and tell him that he's a bad man, and that's why all these terrible things have been happening to him. And it's brutal. And Job refuses to lose faith in himself. He says, look, I'm not perfect. But as far as men go, I've done what I should do, and I'm not being punished in some manner that's obviously related to my sin. It's more like the random play of tragic forces in the world. I'm not going to lose faith in myself no matter what. And I'm also not going to, his wife says, shake your fist at God, curse him and die. Because things have gone so badly for Job, she thinks that's all that's left to him, and he refuses to do that. So he maintains faith regardless of what's happened to him. And that's really the moral of the story of Job, which is that you are morally obligated to maintain faith no matter what happens to you. And there's a practical side to that. So imagine that God and Satan conspire against you. There'll be times in your life where it feels like that's happening. And then imagine that your reaction to that is to become bitter and resentful and hostile. Well, then whatever hell you're in, merely as a consequence of the confluence of tragic events, you have opened a whole other hell underneath it. The hell of bitterness and resentment and ingratitude. And that turns into the desire for revenge very, very quickly. If you think things are bad just because they're bad, you wait till you see how bad they can become if you allow yourself to be corrupted by your unjust suffering, right? And so I do think that this is the most practical possible advice that can be given to people, which is that you are morally required to maintain faith, to aim up, and to treat other people the way you would want to be treated, no matter what's happened to you. And that's a hell of a thing to say. And, you might say, well, that's impossible. Some people have such brutal lives that they're destined to be corrupt. But I would say that's not true. Like, I've met many people, particularly in my clinical practice, who had lives that were so brutal that you couldn't even listen to them without it like breaking you into pieces. Brutal childhoods of a depth of malevolence you can hardly conceptualize, who decided despite that they were going to aim up and they were going to maintain faith in themselves and the world. And so it's like, that's on the table for people.
It seems like an odd paradox that the people who have been brought up under lives of the most privileged are often the ones that have the most complaints about the world, and people who have been brought up in deprivation a lot of the time are able to be perfectly in gratitude. It seems very strange that's the way.